And welcome everybody to another edition of Historical Geocaching on the Road with geocacher TM Photobug from Chattanooga, Tennessee, currently travel caching in beautiful New England. Today is our last full day up here in New England, Sunday, but still lots of exciting things planned. Big exciting event of the day is that we are heading over to Eastern New York to visit the William Miller farm. William Miller was the initiator of the movement that immediately preceded the Seventh-day Adventism, and so we definitely very much consider him one of our pioneers, and I am very excited about having the chance to go visit his farm. So yeah, come along with me as I visit the William Miller farm.
The surrounding country, as seen from the Miller farm, furnishes one of the most interesting prospects afforded by the natural scenery of New England. And one of those is, if you look to your left over here, you see the mountain range? Imagine that without these trees. It is simply gorgeous. So you had all this space open, and when we go to the Ascension Rock, there's a beautiful vista of rolling hills. Sorry. You've got some of the jagged hills over here. That's the best that Vermont, New York has to offer. And you can only imagine at the peak of the fall, which was just a couple of weeks ago, blazing with color, the reds, the orange, yellows. It's quite beautiful. So the family and the friends of the family appreciated the location of this home. So it was really nice. Now you heard the basic flow of the Miller story. That's why I like to show that video presentation, so I can just hit some of the highlights. And I'm going to focus on his conversion experience when we go to the chapel. I'm going to talk about his experience as a deist, moving from deism to Christianity, because that I think is so significant. But here, I want to focus after that period, after his conversion. One of the first things Miller did was to plunge himself into a study of the Bible. Because in deism, they rejected the scriptures, criticized the scriptures, but suddenly Miller realizes it's a revelation from God. And so he begins to study the Bible earnestly, and his attention is drawn to the prophetic books of Daniel and Revelation. He's fascinated by them, especially Daniel, and he really became a man of Daniel. And his attention was drawn to those time prophecies. And of course he's known for that most famous text, Daniel 8:14. Under 2,300 days shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And remember I mentioned that house down there where he grew up in? It was in the late night when the fire was blazing after the family had gone to bed. Young boy Miller would read. He had an incredible appetite for books. He especially was drawn to history. He would go to the library and check out as many books as he could and study history. Well, years later, when he began to study the prophecies, he approached the prophecies from the way they were presented in the book of Daniel. You've heard of the term historicism? You've heard of futurism?
Yep.
And preterism?
Yep.
You've been taking Adventist heritage?
Yep.
Dr.
Yep.
Salmon has told you about that?
Yep.
Very good.
Yep.
Preterism, I call it past prophecy. They believe that all the prophecies have been fulfilled in the past. So Daniel and Revelation has no relevance to us. And then you have futurism, which emerged later. Actually was also a response of the Jesuits to the Reformation. And it put all the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation in the future. The fulfillment of Daniel and Revelation are all in the future. But historicism, Miller picked up on historicism. That is the historic Christian churches' approach to the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. They began their fulfillment in the day of the prophet. Daniel's chapter 2 vision began its fulfillment in that day, remember? The head of gold, you Nebuchadnezzar, are this head of gold. So it began its fulfillment in that day. As history unfolded, the prophecy unfolded. So Miller discovered, as his knowledge of history and studying the scriptures, applying the year-day principle to the time periods in Daniel, he saw successive fulfillment of Scripture down through the ages. He concluded, rightly so, that much of Daniel and Revelation had met its fulfillment in the historic power of the papacy. So it made sense to him that much of it had been fulfilled, only a little bit remained, therefore Jesus was going to come soon in his day. And Seventh-day Adventism, as you know, has picked up this historicism. And we're one of the few groups that espouse historicism today. And yet it's the most logical approach to those prophecies. It makes them relevant because it's relevant to our day. Much of it has already been fulfilled, and there's only a little bit to go. We can pinpoint where we are in history. But if it's all in the future, what does that mean for me? If it's all in the past, how is that relevant to me? But historicism makes Daniel and Revelation very relevant. And that's the way that God meant for them to be understood, because that's in the organic context of those passages. And Miller discovered this. And so, for 2 years, from 1816 to 1818, he studied the scriptures intensely. He was a wealthy farmer. He had lots of workers in his family. He delegated the work out. They would take care of the farm, and he was right in here in this study. It's as we're going, it's to your immediate left. We'll walk through the study. It's there that he spent this intensive time studying Scripture, comparing history with the prophecies. He saw as the history unfolded, the prophecies fulfilled, and he came to this block-busting conclusion at the end of those 2 years of study. Let me back up and tell you, Ellen White, in her visionary experience, she saw a lot in Miller. In fact, in her book, The Great Controversy, she places the Millerite movement as a part of fulfillment of prophecy. We looked at that this morning in Revelation 10. And she said that as Miller studied, angels directed his thoughts. Angels directed him in his study. So that's why a lot of us who really like William Miller feel that the study is a really sacred spot. It's my favorite place in all of Adventist heritage, is this room right here. And so at the end of that 2 years of study, he had reached this conclusion. This is 1816 to 1818. Let me read to you what he says. He describes the time periods and so forth. And then he says this: I was thus brought in 1816 to 1818, at the close of my 2-year study of the Scriptures, to the solemn conclusion that in about 25 years from that time, all the affairs of our present state would be wound up. And his conclusion was around 1843. That was about 25 years from 1818. Around 1843, that's when it would happen. And he went on to say, from that time all the affairs of our present state would be wound up. That all its pride and power and pomp and vanity, wickedness and oppression would come to an end. Can you still hear me? And that in the place of the kingdoms of this world, the peaceful and long-desired kingdom of the Messiah would be established under the whole heaven. That in about 25 years, the glory of the Lord would be revealed, and all the flesh see it together. And so that was quite a remarkable conclusion. He believed it without any doubt. Imagine if you believed in your heart that Jesus was coming in exactly 1 year from today. How would that affect your life? If you could pinpoint it even 25 years from today and you knew, it would make a big difference. Well, it did for William Miller. So what happened after that? The next 13, 14 years, he's silent as far as going public with this. It's a powerful message, but he does share it with family and friends. I mean, you'd have family coming over and Miller's giving them Bible studies. He's talking about this. So he's not silent in terms of close friends and family. He is talking about this, preaching it to family and friends repeatedly. And he's been asked, why don't you go and share this with the churches? I'm just a farmer. No way. He felt shy. He was getting old now. Remember, this is like, 40 plus after all this. He's like, I'm not going to do this. No way. And so he resisted going public with it. He thought he was a farmer, not a public speaker. But one-on-one or small groups, yes, they can get Bible studies. So that happens for about 14 years. We get up to around 1830. In this study, he's praying one day, and he feels a great conviction. An overpowering conviction is if the inaudible voice of God spoke in his heart and said, William, you need to go preach this message to larger groups. You've got to go preach. And the conviction was strong, and I can imagine that. I don't think you heard the voice of God out loud. It was an audible voice, a strong, deep impression. I felt those impressions in my life, where I know it's God. It's self-authenticating. He's communicating with me. He's impressing me about something I should do. That's how Miller felt. It was overpowering. He didn't want to do it. That was just unacceptable. Please, God, get me out of this. I can't do this. And to relieve his conscience, as the story goes, here, he made a bargain with God. And you heard some of the story this morning, and I'm going to give you my twist on it. And so he made this bargain with God. Okay, if somebody, Lord, if somebody comes and invites me to preach, thinking he's fooling God, the omnipresent, omniscient God who knows and sees all things in the heart, you can't do that. But Miller somehow was trying to appease himself and his conscience, and so he said, okay, Lord, if you will have somebody come and invite me to preach at their church, that'll be a sign. I will go preach. It was his bargain with God. And then he finished his prayer, and he felt relieved. It's not going to happen. For all these years, I mean, it's over a decade ago he came to this conclusion. Surely the Lord's going to, he shared this with family and friends. Somebody else is going to take up the mantle and preach it, not me. So he settles down in his study, maybe reading his Bible, maybe the newspaper of the day. He's chilling. He's relieved. All these years he's had that nudging that he should go preach it. Now, for just a few short minutes, he's relieved. I don't have to preach. And shortly after that, as the story goes, right here, his nephew, little Irving, was knocking at the door. And of course, William Miller, well, Irving, how are you doing today? Buddy? That's my Northerners don't do that. Southerners, hey, buddy. So, he says, Irving, how are you doing? He says, Uncle would like you to come and share your study about this end of time and the second coming with our church. We'd like you to come and preach tomorrow. It was on Saturday. And Miller couldn't believe it. So Miller, he cannot believe this. He literally is upset, outraged. He feels tricked by God. So he comes right out down this porch and he storms out the house. He's mad. He storms and he walks right down this area here, up that hill into the maple grove. And he spends about an hour there, wrestling with God. I want to do this, Lord. Why? This is not fair. I can't preach. I'm a farmer. And he's really nervous. And probably had butterflies thinking, how could I stand up before a large group and share this message? I can't do it. I can't do it. And he goes back and forth in his mind. So finally, I'll tell you what happened out there. It's hard to describe. Only he and God know what really happened. But I'll tell you what happened. William Miller surrendered. I think that's the most powerful word in the English language for the Christian. The word surrender. He surrendered to the will of God. He surrendered to God's call on his life. And once he surrendered to the will of God, then he was able to say, yes, I'll do it. And then you know what happened as he described the story? The burden, because it's like all of that burden over the years was really intense out of that maple grove. And suddenly it rolls off of him. He's free. Yes, I can do this. I can preach. God will help me. And according to the story, he was so excited, he came out of the maple grove, not walking, not running, but dancing. Literally skipping down that hill. And his little daughter, Lucy, saw him. And she'd never seen him do that. And she came running to the house. Mommy, Mommy, something's wrong with Daddy. The family was a bit freaked out, as we would say today. And he came in and told him, I can preach. And he told Irving, I will be there tomorrow morning. And so the next day he made the trip, and he preached, and it was never the same afterward. All right, this is William Miller's study. We don't know if it was exactly configured this way. The bed probably was right there. The window is in the exact place that they worked, and he could look out, and the trees weren't there, and see those rolling hills, Vermont mountains, as I mentioned, the range, and it was beautiful, gorgeous. And he spent a lot of his time here. On the day of the disappointment, October 22, he stayed in his study the whole time. In fact, both times. You remember the spring disappointment and then the October 22 disappointment? He stayed in this study. Probably he and his buddy Joshua Himes. And a number of the other Millerites gathered around the farm. A lot of them were up at Ascension Rock. And it was typical to have the bed in the study, especially as he got older. He could go and take a nap. And this is not the actual furniture. This is a desk of the period. And this was probably very similar to the desk that he used. So I can picture Miller. And again, it's only conjecture that the desk was in this position. Perhaps it was over here or over there, or maybe it was here. It would be logical, because it would be nice to look out of the window outside. But I love how they have the Bibles open here. It's usually to the book of Daniel. And you can imagine Miller here studying, wrestling over the Scriptures, praying over the Scriptures, coming to this remarkable conclusion. Angels filling this room, guiding his thoughts. It's quite a neat experience. In Daniel 8:14, I'm just going to jump to something modern real quick here. But Adventist scholarship, we have some amazing scholars that read Hebrew and Aramaic, like many of us read Uncle Arthur's bedtime story. And they have concluded, through intensive study of the original language, that Miller's conclusions about the year-day principle and the fulfillment of the 2300 days was right on target. Now, he did make some mistakes. Not everything was totally accurate. As we all know, he concluded that the sanctuary was the world on fire. God would cleanse the world by fire. That was not correct. But all of that helped people see, according to that interpretation, that something of great import was going to happen. And that was, of course, the ultimate point, because that was the inauguration of the final judgment. And so, the fact that angels were guiding him doesn't mean he was perfect and flawless. And I should say that Miller chewed tobacco, he ate pork, he smoked, and he was a Freemason. People don't know that. He was a Freemason. But in that day, the Masonry didn't have all the occult connotations that it has today. And that is a part of his deistic experience, which I'll get into later. But let me say a few words about the furniture. As I already talked about the desk. And the bed, this was not his actual bed. I'll say something about the bed in a moment. And here's an actual Millerite chart, by the way. Fitch had designed this chart.
Is that original?
It is original. That's my understanding. There's a few in existence. This is an actual chair that belonged to the Miller family. It's very possible this was the rocker that was in this room that Miller himself used. But this, and according to every body I've talked to, this was in the study. This was his own rocker. So this is the actual chair that probably was in this study. Again, we can never say for sure because we weren't there. But this was in the house. This was in this home. So, one place or another, Miller rocked in this chair. Is that not cool? See, I can touch it. You can't. 19th century, they didn't have flowing commodes. They had outhouses. But in the middle of the night, you're not going to, especially in the cold of the New England winter, you're not going to go out and use the restroom in the snow. So you have the little potty here. This was typical. That was your potty. And you would take care of business in the night, and the next morning you'd throw it out. In fact, in some of the big cities in Europe, they use this. And I was in Europe several years ago, and in one of the cities, and the guy was telling the story, you did not want to walk by the windows early in the morning because everybody was emptying their potties, throwing them out. And if you got in the way, whew, that's not pleasant. Anyway, now the bed. An interesting story about the bed. This is what a typical 19th century bed. You see inside its corn husk. And this attracted bugs. And the bugs would go in there and habitate and live. And what you did, you didn't want to lay down and have these bed bugs crawling all over you. So you would take this tool here and you would, somewhere, anyway, there was a place on here where you would take it and you would tighten, oh that's it, that's right, I'm sorry. You tighten up the ropes. Yes, that's right. You tighten up the ropes and that would constrict this where the bed bugs couldn't get out. And that's the origin of the saying, sleep tight so the bed bugs don't bite. And this is a brick that they would put in the fireplace.
Yeah, to keep it warm.
And then put that under the bed in the cold of the winter to stay warm. So that was your electric blanket right there, if you will. And remember I told you at Sturbridge Village how the house is the basic construction of a New England home. Really, they got that from Europe, but it worked well here in the cold winter. They would put the chimney in the middle of the house. And there was an example of that, one of the homes at Sturbridge Village. Well, now, the inner structure of the house is somewhat different. Where those stairs are, in the middle, that's where a chimney was. Miller had built this house with the chimney in the middle, and each room, part of that chimney had a fireplace. So his fireplace was right here. The chimney was right there, and his fireplace was here. In the kitchen, it had that side of the square, and then in the other room, you had, in the living room, that's where you had another fireplace from the same chimney. And in those cold winter days, that was the main source of heat. And when it was really cold, I mean, you were lucky if you got the room up to maybe 45, 50 degrees. That's as hot as you could get it, even with the fire blazing, when it was really cold outside. That's typical 19th century life. So that gives you a sense of this study. And I know in my study, I crank the heat up when it's cold. I like it warm. But Miller, they got used to that. And this is that sacred place where he met with God and came to that remarkable conclusion about the second coming of Christ. This is the beginning of the mighty Millerite movement, would eventually transform into Seventh-day Adventism. So this is very important to us as Seventh-day Adventists. This is our spiritual theological roots. So while we'll talk about the Maple Grove and the chapel over there, but to me this is where it really began. And that teaches us a lot. It's that time alone with God in His Word. Do you take time to pray, to meditate in Scripture every day? That's where it all happens. That's where your life is transformed. That's the bedrock of your Christian experience. Is time alone with God. Tag time. Tag time. Time alone with God. Miller had it right here. God is calling you to spend more time with Him in prayer and study the Scriptures. And that will brace you for so many trials in life. None of us can escape trials. They may have been different from William Miller's in the 19th century, but in principle they're the same. And it's that time with God that gives us strength. So I think that's an important lesson from this study.
And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you had a lot of fun learning some more about Seventh-day Adventist history. I sure have enjoyed making these videos. Hope you've enjoyed watching them. Be sure to check out more of my cool videos, both Adventist history videos and otherwise, at my YouTube channel. That's www.youtube.com/tnphotobug. And until next time, this is Geocacher TN Photobug signing out. I am most definitely having a blast with Bast.